Let's talk to some bright, smart people here in New York City right now. Our experts, the former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich, Democratic strategist Stephanie Cutter, who, of course, was President Obama's communications director, our chief political analyst, Matthew Dowd, Roland Martin, host and managing editor of News One Now. So, Matthew Dowd, we just heard Bill Cunningham's take. Your take on the first 100 days.
Well, I look at it this way, and taking a look at this poll, I would describe it as good news, really bad news for President Trump in this. And the good news is, as we've talked about, he's got a solid level of support. It doesn't surprise me. There's a thing in sociologists called anchoring, and voters anchor. And Donald Trump does have an emotional connection, and you can't break an emotional connection with a rational argument. You just can't. And I remember Richard Nixon kept a majority of his vote all the way up until the day he resigned. The bad news is a majority of the country doesn't think he's honest and trustworthy and still questions his temperament. The really bad news is, and this is a little fact I looked up this morning, is no president has ever finished his first term going into a re-election with a higher approval rating than he had at his 100 days. That is problematic going to election. But the interesting thing is Democrats have not taken advantage of any of the polls.
Yeah, we're going to talk about the Democrats. How about that last point, Mr. Speaker, from Matthew Dowd? That was one of the things that I had noticed as well. You start out high here. You don't tend to find things that you could go higher.
You guys all collectively lived through Trump knocking off all the Republicans, Trump knocking off Hillary, being wrong about all of it at every stage, and then you turn around and you apply the same old conventional wisdom. Donald Trump is the most divisive president since Abraham Lincoln. He represents an alternative world. It's why you have riots at places like Berkeley. You have two parallel universes here. There's actually a very funny Megyn Kelly interview I did 2 weeks before the election, and she's giving me all this polling data. And I said, look, there are two universes. Now, if your universe is right, Hillary Clinton's president. If our universe is right, Donald Trump is president.
I completely take that point. That's how he's being seen out in the country, in parts of the country right now. But how does it affect the governing? Can you govern effectively with 40% support?
First of all, as you know, because you've done it, presidents are really powerful. Presidents who are willful and strong-willed and focused have enormous capability to move the system. But second, I have a very simple test. Reagan, in his farewell address, says, "I am so proud that together we created 19 million jobs." If Trump has the economy roaring in 2020, he'll get reelected. I don't care what the current numbers are. If Trump doesn't have the economy rolling in 2020, he has a problem.
It's called patience. All that stuff Bill said, how wonderful they feel about Trump, they're screwed, those same places, they're screwed with their health care, with their education. And so they can love Trump all day, but when you start looking at his policies, look at his budget, those same people are going to be crying because his policies are going to hurt them the most. He talked about coal coming back. We've lost more retail jobs under Trump than the number of coal jobs in America. Coal is not coming back. But again, they think that because he keeps saying it, okay, go right ahead. All you got to do is just wait for it because those same folks are going to be crying a year from now.
So, excuse me, I actually agree with a little bit of what everybody has said here. I think that 100 days is not an extraordinary amount of time for a president who has never governed, never really stepped foot in Washington, to walk into the White House doors and learn what it means to be president. And clearly, Trump is learning in real time on the job. We saw that with health care. He wasn't able to accomplish anything with health care because he had no idea how Congress worked.
It was so hard.
And he had no idea how health care worked. Will that change the next go around? Works. But I think we have to look at this in a bigger picture. These voters that we are talking about, the Trump voters, the president still does have a halo effect with them because he hasn't done anything to hurt them that they see yet. He hasn't really done anything to help them.
Right.
What's he done? He's put forward a travel ban that's been reversed by the courts. He's rolled back women's rights. He's rolled back LGBT rights. He's shrinking regulation. Those things don't have an everyday impact on those people's lives. But, as Roland said, as budgets get passed, as legislation moves, or as their lives don't get better, all of that's going to change.
George, I think, first of all, Donald Trump has always benefited like a guy in basketball that can push up against somebody, right? And the reason why he benefited and continues to benefit in this poll is he's pushed up against Hillary Clinton. That's the problem that Democrats have. They have to have an emerging leader. If they don't have an emerging leader that's popular, Donald Trump is going to continue to do well. The 100 days thing, I have to say the 100 days thing is a little bit of a PR fiction, right? It was started by FDR, and it's really not a standard that's predictive. How well you do in your first 100 days doesn't tell you how you're going to do in a re-election. But but there ought to be some standard. And I look at the first 100 days in 3 ways. One, how's your approval rating? It's bad for Donald Trump. What's your level of acceptance on your policies? It's bad for Donald Trump. And the third way, which I think is most important, as John said, which is accountability to your own standard. On Donald Trump's own standard of what he said he was going to do in the first 100 days, he hasn't done very well. It's a little bit like the guy that says he's going to lose 20 pounds in 100 days and brags to everybody he's going to lose 20 pounds. And at the end of the 20 days, you say, you don't look like you lose weight. And he says, why are you holding me to that standard?
The speaker said,
I want to bring that to the speaker right now, because now we're facing, and John Carl also talked about how the president is pushing hard for health care to come back. He's going to introduce something on tax reform, maybe some principles on Wednesday, all while he's facing this possibility of a government shutdown next week. How does he maneuver through that?
Well, I mean, first of all, I don't think Donald J. Trump worries a lot about next Saturday. I mean, this is a guy who's
Except for golf.
No, yeah, except for golf. I think this is a guy who has built.
Shouldn't he be worried
No,
about that?
this is a guy who's built an empire by thinking about very long-term things. He's been very patient, and I think that Stephanie had it right.
You're describing Donald Trump as patient?
Very. He's very patient strategically. He has enormous energy tactically, but he's very. I mean, go back and look at the polls. Go back and look at what he went through to get to be president. I mean, this is a guy who said, "I can be president." Everybody else laughed at him. Literally laughed at him.
I don't think you would.
So look, here's what I think he's got to do, and I think he will do it. The odds are very high the House Republicans are going to pass a health reform bill. Dave Bratt just did his
Maybe
newsletter.
not next week, but sometime
within
in the next few weeks.
Within the next
Yeah.
2 weeks. The odds are very high that by next Friday they will pass a 1-week extension and not close the government and have to think about it, and they may then pass another week extension. But they're all going to fudge around. Here's what I think you guys don't get. Conservative Supreme Court justice, done. Coming across the border down by, I think, 65 or 70%. That's a fact. Having a guy like John Kelly in charge of Homeland Security is very impressive if you're a conservative. The fact is that they have passed, I think, 28 bills. They've had 25 or 26 executive orders. If you are a normal Trump supporter, you're thinking, okay, he's getting his brains beaten out by the lead media. That's about right. But in fact, he's getting a lot done. And you watch this contrast. And I'm really, frankly, very angry about it. The White House Correspondents' Dinner has brought in a person who is viciously anti-Republican, anti-Trump, anti-gun rights. And you're going to watch people who look at that, people in Ohio, who look at that on C-SPAN and watch Trump's rally that night, which is very smart. And they're going to say, okay, which America do I identify with?
Speaker, look,
they're going to identify with Trump.
They're bringing in a comedian, whatever. The bottom line is this here.
No,
You talk,
viciously
no,
anti-Trump.
okay, fine. Whatever you want to call it, he's a comedian. But here's the deal. You talk about this whole deal with coastal elites. I travel across this country, okay, somebody who's born and raised in Texas. And the bottom line is this here. Those same very people who keep saying they're loving Trump, they also are scared to death of this health care bill. And if the House Republicans pass a bill that's going to affect their health care, trust me, you think those town halls have been tough so far? These same Republicans are scared to death, and that's why they're canceling them. And those are the same real people you're talking about.
They're changing the bill. They're going to have guaranteed issues.
You're changing a bill that nobody knows what it is. Nobody sees what it is.
I'm just saying,
and when those
it.
very same people, when they see the real effects and how it affects them, they're going to stop loving Trump.
I think that there are a couple of signs here. You know, our talk about Donald Trump versus Hillary Clinton and Washington elites versus Donald Trump. You know, we're heading into a midterm election where a lot of that is not going to matter, except for how much of a drag Donald Trump is on the Republican ticket in terms of energy and enthusiasm with Republicans turning out. There are a couple of signs here that Republicans are worried. Number one, there's a lot of anxiety about whether they do health care. Why are they going to take this vote? Because it will impact the outcome of the midterm election. When you're taking away somebody's health care rights, premiums are going up, they are going to own that big time. The second thing is we do have some evidence through these special elections that the Democratic base, while it may not be as unified as it could be, is extremely energized. And Trump is a big factor. That's not the whole answer, but it is a big factor. And we've seen that in Georgia.
We see them energized basically by the anti-Trump factor. But one of the things we also saw in this poll, Matthew, and you hinted at that before, most Americans now, 67%, think that Democrats are more out of touch than Republicans.
Well, this is the problematic. This is how Donald Trump benefits, right? And this is why Democrats are still, it's a very problematic situation for the Democrats. And I think, everything, God love her, but every time Hillary Clinton shows up at a speech and does that, it doesn't help the Democrats. They have to, in my view, they have to figure out who is their next generation, who is their next round of leaders that can push up against Donald Trump. And I'll take one exception with or a couple of exceptions with the speaker said. I grew up in Michigan. I grew up in Detroit. I have 10 brothers and sisters. I live in Texas. I see the panorama of the country. I was one of the first people that said Donald Trump was going to win the Republican nomination and beat the others because I saw the level of support out there. Keep in mind that Donald Trump, ever since he was inaugurated as president, a majority of the country has disapproved of Donald Trump. And so, yes, while we have this, while we can keep talking about elites, elites, and elites, I know in almost every single urban area in the country, Austin, Dallas, Houston, New Orleans, St. Louis, Kansas City, Cincinnati, the city of Cincinnati, in spite of that, Cleveland, all of those areas, they didn't vote for
it's
Donald.
urban, rural.
Yes.
Well, it's also suburban.
Just, two quick things. First, there's one study last week, 91% of the elite media coverage of Trump has been negative. Trump will have negative coverage. It'll have an effect on the polls. That's just a reality. This is the war we're in. Two.
I mean, war from facts versus accountability.
No, it's a war you guys make up. But the second thing is,
You guys.
I believe, and I'm happy to come back and talk about it later in a couple of weeks. By the time they get a bill through the House and the Senate and through conference committee, they'll be able to answer every question you're talking about in terms of Trump voters and health care, and it will be better than the collapsing Obamacare we're
They
living
can't answer
through.
in the United States Senate.
The marker has been set. We'll have you all back. That was a great discussion. Thank you all.